Welcome to episode 11 of At Home at Highclere for Viking.TV. And it's been an exciting week for Explorers Week. And of course now one of my husband's ancestors, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was the most extraordinary man and great explorer. He in the end was part of the team with Howard Carter who discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun. He wasn't in fact the only great adventurer and traveller in the family, because his younger brother Aubrey Herbert was also a tremendous explorer and traveller. And Aubrey in fact I think spoke something like 7 languages: Arabic, Greek, Albanian, Turkish, French, German, Italian, as well as English. So I don't think we're doing quite as well, are we, Geordie? How many languages do we speak?
Well, he was a great classicist at university too.
Yes, so that's Latin and Greek as well, so I think I've underdone him. But anyway, here we standing, not such strong classicists, but in an exhibition which means so much to us. It's a permanent exhibition in the cellars at Highclere Castle. This was originally the staff dining room, much as you see on Downton Abbey, but is now a celebration of the antiquities collection, the original antiquities collection of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. So Geordie, do you want to tell us a little about your extraordinary great-grandfather?
Well, my great-grandfather, the 5th Earl, he was really one of the great explorers of the Edwardian age of adventure. He actually started his adventurous life by sailing, didn't he? So much around the world, in fact, all the way down to the southern tip of Argentina. He's involved in escapades in Africa on safari. And then he got into the extraordinary technology of the motor car. He had an absolute passion for that, and he began to import the earliest cars into England. But unfortunately, his enthusiasm ran away with him, and he got involved in quite a number of quite serious accidents. So the doctors advised him to spend the winters in a dry climate. And with that idea, he thought, right, I'm going to go to Egypt, nice dry climate, nice and warm in the winter, but I'm not going to sit around in Cairo having fun at parties. I'm going to be an explorer and adventurer again, and I'm going to become an Egyptologist. And he began in a rather sort of unexciting, he was allocated, not the most exciting part of Luxor with his first work in about 1903-04, wasn't it, his first season. And all he found after turning over thousands of tons of rubble in all the warmth and heat of the autumn in Luxor was a mummified cat.
Yes.
Now most of us...
It was a mummified cat coffin,
coffin, sorry.
Which was actually quite large. It was about this big. I thought.
And you can see it to this day in the animal mummy section of the Cairo Museum. But nevertheless, he was going to persist, historical chap that he was, and he went on and developed quite a passion and expertise in excavations, and he found a number of exciting objects like this great noble lady Ertu here with her coffin and other tombs, and then later he teamed up with Howard Carter.
Yes, that was not till 1909, so he began working very much on his own.
Yeah.
And he was passionate about Egypt, its architecture, its works of art, and he very much liked the local Egyptian people. And he was often to be found in a coffee house. I think I'd be found there too, drinking delicious, very strong little cups of Turkish black coffee. He used to
stay in the glorious Winter Palace Hotel, which is much the same today. Cross over the wonderful River Nile on a sailing boat.
Just as we've done
today. And then of course he would go on a mule or pony all the way up towards the Valley of the Kings. Quite hard work, quite a hard life, a lot of dust and dryness, always watching about water and effort and organising everything. And then of course he did eventually build a house for Howard Carter, didn't he, later on? Which year was that about?
I think it was around about 1910, because they shipped out bricks which were stamped 1909.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was to Howard Carter's design, but Lord Carnarvon built a studio at the back in which he could develop all the photographs that he took.
He was a great pioneer of fairly early photography, but of a very high quality photographs, which we have here today, and we show people as they go around this exhibition.
Well, we do. Well, I think you thoroughly enjoy photography, and so does our son Eddie, actually.
I think it's a little bit easier for us nowadays with digital compared to his extraordinary plates of such high resolution, which we can still manipulate and use today because the resolution is so high.
And we hardly have to touch them, actually.
No, we don't,
so I think with mine, I'm always thinking, oh my God, it's not quite right. But he was an amazing photographer, very resilient, very stoical. The house that he and Howard Carter built was was quite Spartan but very comfortable. I have to say, when they travelled to Egypt, they took Lord Carnarvon and his wife Amina, who went every single trip with him, also took their French chef and their wines, and they sort of moved into the Winter Palace Hotel and had a very good life.
Very comprehensive medicine chest he has, which we have the example. And we actually, people can see his camera as well here. And then we show people how he moved for the different seasons and what he actually discovered. And remember, we've found this wonderful cache of objects between the smoking room and the drawing room after my grandfather died.
Yes, so that's true. So of course, what we have in this particular room is the remainder of the Fifth Earl's collection of antiquities, much of which was sold to the Metropolitan Museum of New York. There was some items were left behind, and his son, who became the sixth Earl, was quite superstitious about them. So they're all put away in cupboards and hidden and forgotten about. Incredibly lucky for us. So it was only when your grandfather died that your father and Robert Taylor the butler, just like Carson and you, had a moment of treasure again.
Well, yes, Robert was going around with my father, and I happened to be around on that day. And Robert says, we were doing an inventory of everything in the castle. Robert says to my father, "Oh, my lord, there is, of course, the Egyptian stuff." My father said, "What Egyptian stuff, Robert? That's all in Cairo, in the museum, or in New York?" "No," he says, "there's cupboards between the drawing room
and the smoking
room. So, and then because we find these extraordinary objects, which in fact are around here in front of us, little makeup chests from Queen Hatshepsut, the time of Queen Hatshepsut's temple, her mortuary temple, little eye
I love the
pouch.
coal pots and everything else.
Eye makeup pouch, and that glorious archer's wrist guard, which still has the traditional enemies of Egypt, the sort of Syrians to the north and the Nubians to the south, stamped on the leather. And you're looking at things which are 3,500 years old.
It is amazing, isn't it? And I know that the great big alabaster pot was found behind some objects in a flower room, and something, the shabti of Amenophis III, to do with his grandfather, was found in a gun cupboard.
The wonderful face of Tutankhamun's grandfather at the great pharaoh Amenhotep III, which actually looks quite like Tutankhamun. We found this in a strange scullery cupboard, didn't we? But it's still got Howard Carter's catalogue number on the bottom of it.
So I think, Lord Carnarvon, without doubt, went way outside his comfort zone. He was exploring, he was finding, discovering. He loved travel, and of course to travel to Egypt from Highclere, you'd have sailed across to France, caught the train down to Marseille, sailed across the Mediterranean to arrive at Alexandria before again catching the train. So the whole process of travel was an adventure. It wasn't merely
it was a
arriving.
three-week journey then. Before you could fly in anywhere.
But perhaps it was better for our souls because you enjoyed the journey rather than the scrum at an airport.
True enough, yeah.
So I think after this, what we might do, Geordie, is if we carry on and perhaps look at some of the cars that your great-grandfather owned, sadly none of which we have today, and then we can move on towards the shrine or something.
Yeah,
Should we go that way?
Why don't we do that? Good idea.
Okay. I love some of the early car shots. The big photograph at the back here is of some panhard levasseurs, very much the car of the moment, a French car outside the castle, probably about 1909, 1910. But this fifth Earl of Carnarvon owned about 60 cars over his lifetime. One of his favourites was a 1912 Bugatti. Sadly, of course, we have none of these cars today, but he certainly liked driving fast. And that's quite funny because he did get quite a few speeding tickets, didn't he?
You can actually trace some of the progress of his driving career in cars through the speeding fines which he got. And he must have got one of the first ever speeding fines in the country in 1898 for doing 12 miles an hour in Newbury. And then there was a specialist barrister by 1901, a Mr. Firth. Times have not changed much really, who got him off, and we have actually the summons and the fines for some of his speeding. He loved his horse racing a lot because he was a great breeder and owner of racehorses, and he used to travel to Newmarket, and that meant going through Epping Forest. So a bunch of these speeding fines are about going too fast.
25 miles an hour through Epping Forest.
But we forget that even those days you could have a fatal crash at 30 miles an hour because there was nothing like the safety equipment that you have now, and you may turn over and be thrown out of a car. So it was quite a frightening thing sometimes.
There are some very funny stories, which I hope you will enjoy reading about them. So this part of our exhibition takes you through some of the Fifth Earl's life It carries on to look at the medicines and that he took with him to Egypt. It's about the photography and his wonderful camera, his life back at Highclere, the amazing weekend house parties he threw, from the cocktails they drank to the delicious food to the beautiful clothes they wore, much, I suppose, as you saw when Downton Abbey began in 1912 when the Titanic sank. So at that stage, if you fact the real Highclere Castle, the real Downton Abbey and Highclere Castle and Downton Abbey all muddled together, just as they muddled together in words and language. But this was where the 5th Earl would continue to go out to Egypt every single winter until, of course, the First World War. In 1914, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon was so excited because he was finally granted the concession to excavate in the Valley of the Kings. Until that point, he'd excavated the Valley of the Nobles, the Valley of the Queens. He contemplated working at Cellar, which was the site of Tutankhamun's father's great city. He'd also gone up to Tel Balamun in the Delta, and he'd spent one season excavating amongst the mud flats up there. So his passion, diligence and commitment were extraordinary. Anyway, in 1914, we know on the other side of things, it was the outbreak of the First World War. So his work in Egypt stopped for the next 4 years, and he took up the baton again after the First World War and returned to Egypt with his wife, with his daughter, and met up once more with Howard Carter to continue the excavations. He nearly gave up in 1922. He was running out of money. Income tax in this country had been 6% in 1914. At the end of the First World War, it was 60%. Sounds more familiar. Debt to America had increased tenfold, and the 5th Earl of Carnarvon was struggling to keep going. So he'd said to Howard Carter he thought he would have to close the excavation work in Egypt. But then there was one last roll of the dice.
Well, there was, because there was a fateful house party weekend here for Newbury races in June 1922, when my great-grandfather said to Howard Carter, well, I think Howard Carter actually offered to pay for another year himself, which was a hell of a gamble for him. But my great-grandfather said, no, I won't let you do that. We'll have one more year, and we'll be very careful where we start excavations. And they sort of looked at the map. In fact, the copy of the two men, the maquettes of the two men are poring over the map of the Valley of the Kings, and they start with one area which was the workmen's huts of the great pharaoh Ramesses, which hadn't been disturbed before because it was a path for tourists of all things.
Exactly. So when they went out early, and Howard Carter went out before Lord Carnarvon, and then of course they got that extraordinary telegram back here, have made wonderful discoveries. So that really was a huge game changer and thrust Lord Carnarvon into the spotlight and the attention of the world media. And perhaps after the tragedy and the terrible years of the First World War, the discovery of the treasures of a lost boy king just grabbed everyone's imagination. It grabbed the world
because it was the first time, not only there was the first of the movies, the 8mm movies were working, weren't they? So the press could actually show moving pictures. You could transmit sound around the world for the first time. I mean, it was extraordinary, wasn't it?
Yes, and then of course at the end of it they did discover it was the tomb of Tutankhamun, and it also led to your grandfather's death. So let's move on and have a look at our replica tomb, because it's quite fun. That was all your idea, Geordie. It was brilliant. We're actually in what was the white wine cellar, and it was Geordie's amazing idea to create this extraordinary replica display within our old cellars. And that's what we've done. So, and Geordie chose what we were bringing in here, and then I've just helped interpret it and place it. It was his great-grandfather.
This room is not so far different from the absolute size of the tomb of Tutankhamun. It's one of the smallest tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And on the outer walls, we actually have the very accurate copies of the glorious wall paintings in the tomb. But the two key objects here are the middle coffin with all this extraordinary rishi effect of semi-precious stones and colours, and of course an extraordinary copy of the mummy of Tutankhamun, which Howard Carter actually had a great deal of difficulty in extracting from the coffin, didn't he? Because it was covered in very heavy resin, and they had to use hot knives, and there was some little minor damage when they took it out. But it's an extraordinary replica. And of course, he's adorned in the key things for the next world, with his sandals, his the rings, they're eternity rings,
well,
the rings of eternity.
Rings of eternity. So it's not a real skeleton, let me assure you, but it's very lifelike. And Geordie wanted it to be shown, so it's partly mummified, part of the skeleton. You can see where, in fact, the real skeleton's knee is slightly broken. He's wearing his golden sandals so that when he goes into the next world, the world of eternity, the world of the resurrection, he is ready to stand up and be recognized as a pharaoh with eyes, and people will know his name. So everywhere, on the walls, on his coffins, on every precious object, on every everyday object within the artifacts of the tomb, is the name Tutankhamun and his everyday name Neb-Khepra-Ra. So this is Neb-Khepra-Ra with his beautiful jewellery, his arms carefully folded with his jewellery around his neck. And then behind us we've also got a copy of the extraordinary face mask, one of the most well-known icons in the entire world. It's
But he's
so
also guarded in the next world by the cobra.
Yes.
On him, and he has his dagger as well,
which helps take him through the hours of the night. So when he dies, you travel through the hours of the night in Egyptian religion and culture until you reach the next world, and there you'll be greeted and welcomed into the world that lasts forever. And literally, Tutankhamun took with him everything he needed, from garlic to geese to chicken to eat, to shabati to work for him, to his boxes, to his with papers and papyri in, to his walking sticks, to replica boats, to his chariots. Everything went with him. Today we, I think, more metaphorical. We take our spirits with us, though again it matters where we're buried and that we're remembered, and that we say our names, and if you say his name out loud, a way of remembering him. Isn't Egypt extraordinarily fascinating? It's a country I've really come to love. I've loved to visit it. I've been several times, and I can't wait actually to go back there. And I know that Viking have got some cruises up the Nile, and I hope I might at one point join them. Now, before we start, I've got two dogs with me today, Freya and Stella, and they are quite excited, although they have had lots of walks. So if you hear noises in the background, it's the two puppies thoroughly enjoying themselves and playing with each other. So I'm sorry about that. Freya, you're going to sit down. Come here. Freya? Freya, here. Freya, up. Right. Sit. So I hold it.
It's okay. There we go.
So we've had a bit of a problem at the start, technical issues. Never film with dogs or children, and the dogs have made a point of that. But I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions, and I think, Kat, you've got one of the first questions for me.
Yes, so we actually have a dog-related question first. So we've got Linda from Athens who is asking, is there a book of Finza in Egypt?
There is. Finza is Stella and Freya's mother. So they were born here at Highclere, and Finza belongs to Carina Hagen of Viking cruises, and a wonderful girlfriend. So Finza does indeed go to Egypt, and she meets Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon, and she has a really nice time and learns a lot. I think she learns to write hieroglyphs. Carina and I sort of did that one together with a nod to the past. It's fun.
We now have a question from Sharon in Tumwater. She loved the photos that were put on the video that was playing just before now, and she's asking, is there a collection of these photos available to purchase?
Sharon, I'm thinking of putting together a photographic book which could be purchased. I haven't quite got round to it, and actually I'm also wanting to share them with the Egyptian government in the new museum. So I would like to do something to share our story with the new museum that's been created in Giza by the Egyptians at the moment, but I'm hoping at some point to work with them.
And we now have a question from Sarah from Cobbleskill. She's asking, how old was the Earl when he discovered the tomb?
Goodness me, I'm an accountant, so I'm never very good at figures, but the Earl was about 55 years old. He died when he was 56. In fact, he may have been 56 because his birthday was in June. So he was not very old. You know, I'm heading that way, and oh my goodness, that's when he sadly died. Quite frightening. He was very slim. He'd had an enormous number of car crashes, so he had compromised his health. It was the early days of cars and driving in the beginning of the 20th century. He was also fascinated by planes, so he had turned his body upside down, and sadly he died when he was just 56, perhaps from the stress, perhaps related to the discovery of Tutankhamun. Who knows? That's a book to write.
Thank you, Lady Carnarvon. We now have a question from Alina in Toronto. She's asking, have you ever been to the Valley of the Kings yourself?
Alina, thank you for the question. And actually, I've been to Toronto as well as the Valley of the Kings. And I gave a talk in the Royal Ontario Museum, actually about Canada's constitution. And I've been to the Valley of the Kings, and I also love giving talks on Egypt, but also simply exploring it and looking with wonder and admiration, not just at the extraordinary tombs that were created there, but also thinking of the hard work and commitment of Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter, who continued to explore the Valley of the Kings through their archaeological digs.
And related to that, Yale from New Jersey is asking, will you be writing a book coinciding with the 100th anniversary of the tomb of Tutankhamun?
How very kind. I would love to write the book. I've begun some research. Stella and Freya, can you come and sit down here and be quiet? Sit down. Yeah, I would love to. I've started some of the research. It's a big book to write. I've got quite a lot of information and new information and some great stories which I think would be very good to share. So I would very much like to complete that. My idea is by the autumn of 2022, funnily enough.
And I suppose this story might be involved. Beryl from Tampa is asking, what is the 5th Earl's involvement in World War One?
Beryl, thank you. I wrote about World War One in Lady Almina in the real Downton Abbey. She was the main story, and you know, he was obviously her husband, a very important story. And he was medically unfit and he didn't take part, and a little bit older. So he got involved in the Royal Flying Corps and helping them photograph the trenches. So the British forces knew where the German trenches were. It's all about information and then communicating it. And he supported his wife, who was running her extraordinary hospital here.
Further to this, so Ruth from Claremont is now asking, if we come to Highclere, can we see the artefacts?
Ruth, thank you. Hi there. Very good evening to you. So you can, in fact, definitely always see the artefacts. It's a permanent Egyptian exhibition, which Johnny and I really created in about 2007-8. We opened it then, a couple of years before Downton Abbey began to be filmed here in 2010. So we had begun with our Egyptian story of treasure and tragedy, and then after that we've sort of highlighted Downton, but it remains, it winds its way round the cellars of the castle. There's about 6 different exhibition rooms in the cellars, and it's, I hope, fun and will capture everyone's imagination and will leave a little bit more thoughtful and reflective about the legacy that Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon left us all, and the extraordinary tombs and culture highlighted by Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings.
Thank you, Lady Carnarvon. Denise from Paris is also interested in the artefacts, and she's asking, do you have a special ventilation system for the exhibition?
Hello, Denise. Yes, we do have a good ventilation system. It's in the cellars, and actually the atmosphere, as in much of the castle, never really changes, which is most fortunate. So the different artefacts within their own cabinets and units are especially, the atmosphere is especially controlled in there, but around it in the cellars we didn't have to do it. It was very stable, never really changes, and you know, there's not much heating here, not much air conditioning, and most times I suppose the British weather is renowned as being the British weather, isn't it?
Thank you. We've got lots of people asking about visiting and how they can visit. So we've got Kathleen in California who's asking, will the castle be open for visitors in 2021?
Well, my goodness, the castle's going to be open once more in early July 2020. So we've got, we plan to open then. We're going to open much more to the castle. We've changed our diary. For example, we used to welcome schools and school children, and we don't feel that's something we are going to offer. So we're going to offer more days of opening to welcome visitors. And we have a regular schedule of events, often slightly different, to try to highlight different themes and find out different people's interests and how they can explore the castle in different ways. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's been very strange being here with hardly anybody here at all.
Pandra from Williamsburg is also asking, which would be the best Viking itinerary that would give us the opportunity to visit Highclere Castle and the exhibition?
Well, there's pre and post extensions for so many of the Viking itineraries, whether you go up the Rhine or you sail to Paris or go and explore the Danube and the Prague as well. Many of them offer a pre or post extension based at Oxford, and then you can have it's a great homes, gardens and gin actually, which is for us ever more appropriate given we've got Highclere Castle gin.
Thank you. We also have a question from Barbara who's asking, do you have a replica of King Tut's meteorite knife?
We don't have a replica of that particular knife. In fact, in the room dedicated to the real antiquities, we do have a very old knife, which actually Geordie and I bought, and it's got a handle which is probably pre-dynastic, but we think the blade of the knife is much, much older and could be 4,000 or 5,000 years old, so way before Tutankhamun, who was 1500 BC. So we do have that knife. In terms of the replica of the tomb, we've got a replica of his, which is not real, it's a skeleton, which partly shows how he was mummified, and we've got a replica Rishi coffin, which is quite special, which I hope you might have seen and noticed.
We have lots of people thanking you for welcoming us into your world and talking about the history and heritage of Highclere. And Tami from Atlanta is asking, do you have any book tours or speaking engagements planned in the USA?
Oh my goodness, all my speaking engagements were first of all cancelled. I'm with the Worldwide Speakers Group, who I think are wonderful. They're based in Washington, and I have so enjoyed working with them. At the core of nearly every speaking engagement is a charity which I'm trying to help raise money for, an American charity, sometimes to do with education, or to highlight different causes, all of which I really enjoy. At the moment, I hope to be in Omaha to give a talk in November of this year, and then I hope to be in LA in January of next year, and then I think I'm in Florida of April. But I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I try to group some of my talks together because I think it's a better way to, fly in terms of use of airplanes. And I've been having Zoom meetings about some of the talks, which is also great because I think it's fantastic to travel, but let's choose when to travel and travel well.
Thank you. We now have a lot of people asking about the room we are in today. So we've got Mike from California asking us, can you tell us about the room you're in?
Thank you, Mike in California, very much for asking. So this is the library. It's Highclere Castle's library. It's got probably 6,500 books in it. Freya, sit, darling, sit, sit. Come on, sit. Thank you, and sit still. Thank you very much. So it's got 6,500 books, actually not many about dogs, which is probably why they're not perfectly trained, but they're much loved, aren't you? Yes. And it's arranged like a normal library. There are gems and treasures absolutely everywhere. The furniture is ours, and when Downton were here, they used our furniture. Sometimes we put some of our lights away in case they got, knocked by a camera boom swinging round and got broken, and some of the china went away. This is a carpet which Geordie and I had made out in India about 5 or 6 years ago. So it's both one we inherited and one which I hope works for us today and gives people pleasure. And a sense of peace, I think, when you walk through this extraordinary room, knowing that so many predecessors here picked up the books and read the books. Sometimes they scribbled in the margin. There's a few atlases with sketches by obviously children who were trying to learn where the geography of the atlases were, and they drew drawings around it in between the pages. I think I find that particular element most charming.
We now have a question from Nancy in Cherry Hill. She is asking, what's your favourite time of the day?
What's my favourite time of the day, Nancy? I don't know. In some ways, every moment's a good moment. And I think the last few months have really made me realise how much I enjoy the smaller details of everyday life, from walking under a tree and hearing a cacophony of birdsong, from laughing at a dog when it falls over itself or splashes through a puddle chasing another one, to watching the pigs down on the farm, or the lambs or the sheep. Sometimes it's the cup of tea at 4:30, or sometimes it's the rather delicious glass of sparkling rosé or something later on in the evening, or sitting down or having conversation with my husband and catching up. And there are so many small wonderful moments. I have to say, every day passes by so jolly quickly that I never know. Another day comes very quickly as well. Goodness me, I gather from Kat that we're coming to the end of the questions. This 10 minutes of questions has flown by. But I can't thank you enough for joining Geordie and I downstairs in the Egyptian exhibition, and for all the wonderful questions you've sent in, which I have not kept up with. I can see more coming in. I hope that you'll join me next Friday for At Home with Viking.TV. I'm going to be in the orangery. I wanted to show behind the scenes the orangery, which inspired much of the ingredients of Highclere Castle gin, the oranges and the lemons. And also there's a vinery, so it will show you where visitors can't normally see. I hope we're going to have a little bit of good weather, and then we'll come back to share the questions again. Thank you so much for joining me.